3 people. 3 completely different decades. Different countries, different lives, different circumstances. But they all have one thing in common. They disappeared in front of witnesses, cameras, or evidence, and simply vanished. No bodies, no confessions, no closure. And in every single case, the last few minutes before they vanished make less sense the more you look into them. Let's start with the one caught on camera. In July of 2014, a 28-year-old German tourist named Lars Mittank flew to Varna, Bulgaria, for a vacation with a group of friends. It was supposed to be a normal trip. Sun, beaches, nightlife. Nothing about it suggested anything was wrong. A few days into the trip, Lars got into a fight at a bar and took a hit to the ear. It wasn't treated properly, and the injury left him in pain, with pressure building in his head that wouldn't go away. His friend said he seemed off after that. Not badly hurt, just different. Then came the phone calls. Lars started calling his mother, and the calls got stranger each time. He told her men were following him, that he was scared, that something was wrong and he needed to get out of the country immediately. His mother, understandably worried, tried to calm him down, but Lars insisted it was real. He said he needed to get to the airport. So he did. He booked a flight home and headed to Varna Airport alone. This is where the story stops being a phone call and becomes something you can actually watch. Airport security cameras caught Lars inside the terminal. He looks anxious. He's moving fast, glancing behind him, clearly checking to see if someone's there. At one point, he approaches airport staff, seemingly asking for help or trying to explain something. Nobody knows exactly what he said. Then, in the final piece of footage anyone has ever seen of Lars Mittank, he does something that still doesn't add up for investigators. He suddenly turns, sprints across the tarmac, jumps over a perimeter fence, and disappears into a patch of woodland near the airport. And that's it. That is the last confirmed sighting of Lars Mittank, ever. Search teams combed the woods. Police checked the surrounding area. Bulgarian and German authorities both got involved. Nothing turned up. No body, no clothing, no phone. Nothing that could explain what happened after he crossed that fence. There are theories. Some believe the ear injury caused a kind of psychological break. A panic reaction, maybe even hallucinations from the trauma and pressure buildup that led him to believe he was in danger when he wasn't. Others think he really was being followed, and whatever happened to him after he vanished into those trees was not an accident. To this day, over a decade later, his family still doesn't have an answer. No remains have ever been found. Lars Mittank is still officially missing. That's the first one. But this next case isn't about someone running from something. It's about someone who seemed to be hiding something himself. Ray Gricar wasn't a random tourist. He was the district attorney of Center County, Pennsylvania, a respected, experienced prosecutor who'd spent decades in the legal system. This was not someone with a history of disappearing or acting erratically. He was, by every account, careful, methodical, and predictable, which is exactly what makes April 15, 2005, so hard to explain. That day, Ray called his longtime girlfriend and told her he was taking a day off. He said he was going for a drive along the Susquehanna River, something he apparently liked to do to clear his head. It was a completely normal thing for him to say. There was no indication anything was wrong. He never came back. When he didn't show up and didn't answer calls, his car was eventually found abandoned near a small shopping area by the river. His laptop and briefcase were still inside. His flip-flops were found near an antique shop nearby, as if he'd simply stepped out and never returned to get them. Investigators pulled his laptop for evidence, and this is where the case takes its strangest turn. The hard drive had been deliberately damaged, not lost. not corrupted by accident. Someone had taken the hard drive out of the laptop and physically destroyed key components in a way that investigators said looked intentional, done specifically to prevent anyone from recovering whatever was on it. Which raises the obvious question: what was on that hard drive that Ray Gricar didn't want anyone to see? As a district attorney, he had access to sensitive information about ongoing cases, informants, and investigations. Some theories suggest he was involved in something professionally that put him at risk. Others point to something more personal. And some investigators have floated an even darker possibility: that someone else destroyed the hard drive after he vanished, to arouse evidence of what actually happened to him. Search teams spent years dragging the river near where his car was found. In 2007, 2 years after he disappeared, a search team recovered a skull along the riverbank not far from where his belongings were located. DNA testing later confirmed it belonged to Ray Gricar. But here's the part that still doesn't sit right with investigators. No other remains were ever found. No clear cause of death was ever determined. There was no evidence of how he ended up in the river, or when. The case remains formally unsolved. Officially, no one knows if Ray Gricar's death was an accident, a deliberate act by his own hand, or something else entirely. And the question of what was on that hard drive, the one thing someone clearly didn't want found, has never been answered. Those first 2 cases happened in our lifetime, with cameras and phone records and DNA testing. This last one happened over 400 years ago, and somehow it's still one of the most unexplainable disappearances in history. Story 3: The Roanoke Colony. In 1587, a group of English settlers, men, women, and children, more than 115 people in total, arrived on Roanoke Island, off the coast of what is now North Carolina. They were led by a man named John White, and they were attempting something incredibly ambitious: the first permanent English colony in the New World. Life on Roanoke was difficult from the start. Supplies were limited. Relations with some of the local indigenous groups were tense, and the settlers were entirely dependent on shipments from England to survive long term. So, not long after arriving, John White made a decision. He would sail back to England himself to gather more supplies and reinforcements, leaving the colonists behind, including his own daughter and infant granddaughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. He expected to be back within a few months. He didn't return for 3 years. England was in the middle of a war with Spain, and every available ship, including the one White needed, was seized for military use. He tried repeatedly to get back to Roanoke, and repeatedly he was blocked. By the time he finally secured passage back across the Atlantic in 1590, 3 years had passed since he'd last seen his family and the rest of the colony. When he finally reached Roanoke Island, he found nothing. Not destruction, not signs of a battle, not bodies, just nothing. The colony was completely empty. The buildings had been carefully dismantled, not burned or destroyed, as if the settlers had packed up and left deliberately with time to plan. There was no sign of a struggle anywhere. The only clue White found was a single word carved into a wooden post: Croatoan. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island and the indigenous tribe that lived there, with whom the colonists had a relatively friendly relationship. Before he'd left for England, White had actually told the colonists that if they needed to relocate for any reason, they should carve their destination into a post or tree. And if they were in danger when they left, they should also carve a cross above it. There was no cross, which suggested, at least based on White's own instructions, that whatever happened, the colonists left on their own terms without being under immediate attack. But a storm hit before White could sail to Croatoan Island to search further, and he was forced to return to England without ever confirming what actually happened to the more than 115 people he'd left behind, including his own family. To this day, historians and archaeologists still don't agree on what happened. Some believe the colonists integrated peacefully with the Croatoan people, blending into the tribe over time. Others believe they tried to relocate and were killed by hostile groups along the way, or wiped out by disease and starvation. Excavations over the decades have turned up scattered artifacts and hints, but nothing that definitively closes the case. More than 400 years later, the Roanoke Colony remains one of the earliest and strangest unsolved disappearances in American history. Over 100 people gone without a trace, leaving behind a single word carved into wood as the only explanation anyone has ever found.